single dad returned from war. His neighbor said one sentence that changed everything. The truck pulled into Maplewood just after midnight. No fanfare, no welcome home banner. No one standing on the porch with open arms. Just Daniel Harper, 31 years old. 3 years older than when he left, and somehow feeling 30 years older than that. Turning off the engine and sitting in silence for a long moment before he could make himself move. The house looked the same. White picket fence, red roses along the garden path, the American flag still hanging by the front door. Just like Emma had put it the day he deployed, everything was exactly as he remembered, except Emma wasn't inside anymore. Daniel grabbed his backpack from the passenger seat and the same one he'd carried onto the transport plane 3 years ago, and stepped out into the warm Virginia evening. The neighborhood was quiet. Crickets, a distant dog, the smell of cut grass and something sweet he couldn't name. He stood at the gate for a moment, just breathing. You're home, he told himself. You made it. But making it home and actually being okay, those were two very different things. And Daniel Harper knew it better than most. He was about to push open the gate when he heard movement next door. He turned. His neighbor Sarah Mitchell was standing in her front garden, a garden hose in one hand, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. She was blonde, wearing a light blue dress, and the evening sun caught her hair in a way that made her look almost unreal, like something out of a painting. They had met exactly twice before he deployed. Brief introductions over the fence. Emma had liked her, said she seemed kind. Daniel hadn't thought about her since. Now she was looking at him like she had something important to say. He expected welcome back, or we missed you, or even just an awkward wave. Instead, she said one sentence, just one, and it destroyed him completely in the best possible way. Lucas learned to ride his bike today, and the first thing he said was, "Wait until Dad gets home, I have to show him." Daniel didn't move. The words hit him like a physical thing, somewhere deep behind the sternum, in the place where soldiers learn to lock everything away, because the battlefield is no place for feelings. He hadn't cried in 3 years, not when Emma died, not at the funeral he'd attended over a video call from a base in Kandahar, watching his 5-year-old son stand at a graveside, not understanding why Daddy wasn't there, not through any of it, but standing at his own front gate, backpack over one shoulder, hearing that his 6-year-old son had learned to ride a bicycle and thought of him first. Daniel's jaw tightened, his eyes burned. He pressed his fist briefly against his mouth and looked away. "He's been waiting for you," Sarah said softly. Her voice wasn't pitying, it wasn't dramatic. She was just stating a fact, the way you tell someone the weather. Every single morning he comes to the window and looks down the street. "I didn't know if you were coming today." He didn't either. He just keeps looking. Daniel cleared his throat. Once, twice. "How is he?" His voice came out rougher than he intended. Sarah considered the question carefully, like she wanted to give him an honest answer, rather than a comfortable one. "He's brave," she finally said. "Like his father." 3 years earlier, Maplewood, Virginia. The night before Daniel deployed, Emma made his favorite dinner. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds. The whole house smelled incredible. Lucas, barely 3 years old, sat in his high chair and threw most of his green beans on the floor with tremendous satisfaction. And Emma laughed so hard she had to set down her fork. Daniel watched them both and thought, this is everything. Right here, this is what it's all for. Emma caught him staring. "Stop looking at me like that," she said, smiling. "Like what?" "Like you're trying to memorize me." He reached across the table and took her hand. "Maybe I am." She squeezed his fingers. Her smile stayed, but something moved behind her eyes. That quiet fear she never let herself say out loud, because Emma Harper was the kind of woman who believed that naming your fears gave them power. "Come back to us," she whispered. "Always," he said. It was the last normal night they ever had. 6 months into his deployment, Emma was diagnosed with an aggressive form of brain cancer. She didn't tell him right away. Waited 3 weeks, before she finally broke down on a video call and told him the truth through tears. She'd clearly been holding back for a long time. Daniel had requested emergency leave. It was denied. Operational necessity. He was in the middle of something he couldn't talk about on an unsecured line. He spent the next 4 months watching his wife disappear over pixelated video calls. In 30-minute windows when the connection held, Emma lost her hair, then her words started slipping, then she started having trouble recognizing faces. But she always recognized Daniel. Right until the very end, whenever his face appeared on that screen, she'd smile. "There he is," she'd say. "There's my soldier." She died on a Tuesday morning in October. Daniel found out via a phone call from Emma's mother, delivered in the flat, careful voice of someone who had been rehearsing the words for hours. He sat alone in his bunk for a long time after that. Then he got up, went back to work, and didn't talk about it to anyone. That was the only way he knew how to survive. Coming home to a stranger. Lucas didn't recognize him at first. Daniel had known that was possible. The family counselor at the base had warned him. Children adapt. They create new normals. Don't be hurt if the reunion is complicated, but knowing something intellectually and experiencing it are entirely different things. Lucas opened the front door in a way someone had clearly heard the truck and woken him up, and Daniel realized with a start that Sarah must have had a key, and stood in the doorway in his pajamas, hair messy, eyes wide. He stared at Daniel. Daniel stared back. "Hey, buddy," Daniel said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "It's me. It's Dad." Lucas looked at him for a long, agonizing moment. Then he looked past Daniel, at Sarah, who was standing a few feet back on the path. Sarah gave him a small nod, and something in Lucas's face shifted, like a key turning in a lock. He launched himself off the porch step. Daniel caught him, dropped to one knee on the front path and caught his son and held him so tightly that Lucas made a small sound of surprise, and then wrapped his thin arms around Daniel's neck and held on just as hard. Daniel pressed his face into his son's hair. He smelled like shampoo and sleep and something indefinably, heartbreakingly familiar. "I knew you'd come back," Lucas mumbled into his shoulder. "I told Miss Sarah, I said you'd come back." "I told you I would," Daniel managed. "You always keep your promises," Lucas said. "Mom said so." That was the moment Daniel Harper finally cried. Not quietly, not with dignity. He knelt on the front path of his own house and sobbed in a way he hadn't since he was a child. Ugly and raw and completely unguarded. While his 6-year-old son patted him on the back with one small hand and said, "It's okay, Dad. It's okay," over and over in a voice that sounded so much like Emma that Daniel could barely breathe. Sarah stood at the edge of the path and watched. She didn't say anything, didn't move closer, just stayed, present, quiet, a steady witness to something private and devastating and necessary. Later, Daniel would think that was one of the kindest things anyone had ever done for him. The weeks that followed. Adjusting to civilian life after combat is its own kind of war. Nobody talks about that part enough. The way you flinch at car backfires. The way you wake up at 4 a.m. convinced something is wrong. The way the silence of a quiet neighborhood feels somehow louder and more threatening than the noise of a base. Daniel struggled. He didn't admit it. He got Lucas to school, made breakfast, fixed the things around the house that had fallen into disrepair over 3 years. He functioned. From the outside, he probably looked fine. But inside, he was lost in a way he didn't have the vocabulary to explain. Sarah noticed. She brought food over, initially with casseroles and baked goods with the straightforward generosity of a good neighbor. Daniel thanked her politely and felt nothing. Then one evening she knocked on the door and said, "Lucas told me you used to build things. He said you made him a rocking horse when he was 2. Daniel blinked. "I did. There's a community workshop on Elm Street. They're looking for someone to teach a woodworking class on Saturday mornings." She shrugged. Thought it might be something. He almost said no. He'd been saying no to everything. But something about the way she said it, not as charity, not as pity, just as information, delivered matter-of-factly, made him pause. "What time?" he asked. The woodworking class saved him. That sounds dramatic, but it's the truth. There's something about working with your hands, about taking raw material and shaping it into something real and useful and lasting, that reaches the parts of a person that talking can't touch. Daniel taught 8 students that first Saturday. Retired men mostly. A few younger guys. One woman who was building a bookshelf for her daughter's room. He didn't say much, just showed them what to do. But he came home that afternoon feeling lighter than he had in months. Lucas was waiting on the porch. "Did you have fun, Dad?" Daniel thought about it. "Yeah," he said, surprised to mean it. "I think I did." Lucas grinned, Emma's grin, exact and devastating, and said, "Miss Sarah said you would." The conversation. It was a Sunday evening in late September when Daniel finally asked. He and Sarah were sitting on his porch. She'd come over to return a casserole dish, stayed for coffee, and somehow 2 hours had passed, and the light was going golden, the way it does in Virginia in fall, and Daniel had been quiet for a while. "Why did you do it?" he asked. Sarah looked at him. "Do what?" "All of it, Lucas, the key. The food, the workshop thing." He paused. "You barely knew us." Sarah was quiet for a moment. She turned the coffee cup in her hands. "Emma asked me to," she said finally. Daniel went very still. "She came over about 2 months before she died." Sarah continued, her voice steady but careful. "She knew she was running out of time. She asked me to keep an eye on Lucas. On you, when you came back." She glanced at him. "She said you'd try to do everything alone and it would be too much and someone needed to make sure you didn't disappear into yourself." Daniel's throat tightened. "She knew you," Sarah said simply. "She knew exactly who you were. And she loved you enough to make arrangements." The neighborhood was quiet. Somewhere down the street a sprinkler was running. The American flag by the door moved in a slight breeze. "She also said," Sarah added, almost to herself, "that you were worth knowing." Daniel didn't say anything for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "She was right," he said, "about the disappearing into myself thing. That's exactly what I was doing." "I know," Sarah said. "I didn't even realize it." "People rarely do." He looked at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time. The woman who had held things together for his son while he was on the other side of the world, who had done it not because she had to, but because a dying woman had trusted her with the most important thing in her life. "Thank you," he said. It felt entirely inadequate. Sarah shook her head. She would have done the same for anyone. "I'm not thanking Emma," Daniel said quietly. "I'm thanking you." 1 year later, Lucas's 7th birthday party was loud and chaotic and exactly what a 7-year-old's birthday party should be. 8 kids, a homemade cake with lopsided frosting, a backyard full of laughter. Daniel stood at the grill flipping burgers and felt, for the first time in longer than he could remember, genuinely, simply happy. Not performing happiness, not functioning, not surviving, actually happy. He looked across the yard to where Sarah was helping Lucas blow out his candles. Her head bent close to his, both of them laughing at something. Lucas caught his eye and waved frantically. "Dad, come on!" Daniel set down the spatula and walked over. He stood behind his son, hands on the boy's shoulders, and looked at the cake with its 7 candles and its chaotic frosting and the words, "Happy Birthday, Lucas," written in blue icing that had smeared slightly to the left. "Make a wish," Sarah said to Lucas. Lucas screwed up his face in intense concentration. Then he opened one eye and looked up at Daniel. "I already got what I wished for," he announced. Dad came home. Then he blew out all 7 candles in one breath and everyone cheered. And Daniel pressed his hand briefly to his son's head and didn't trust himself to speak. Later, after the guests had gone and Lucas was asleep with cake frosting still on his chin, Daniel found Sarah in the kitchen washing up. He stood in the doorway for a moment. "Stay," he said. She turned. "Not..." He started, then stopped, trying to find the right words. "I just mean, you don't have to rush off. Have another coffee. It's a nice evening." Sarah looked at him for a moment. Then she smiled. Emma had been right about that smile. It changed the whole room. "Okay," she said. "One more coffee." Epilogue, 2 years later. The woodworking class was full every Saturday now. 18 students. Daniel had to turn people away. Lucas was 9. Confident and funny and startlingly perceptive. An old soul in a small body. The kind of kid teachers always remember. He had Emma's laugh and Daniel's stubbornness in an entirely original, Combination of both that was uniquely, perfectly himself. And Sarah was there, in the ways that mattered. No grand declarations, no dramatic moments. Just present steady, real, the way the best things in life tend to arrive. Quietly, without announcement, like coming home. One morning Daniel found Lucas in the kitchen drawing something. He leaned over to look. It was a house, stick figures out front, a woman with yellow hair, a man with a backpack, a kid on a bicycle. Who's that? Daniel asked, pointing to the woman. Lucas looked up at him with Emma's eyes. Clear, direct, knowing. That's our family, he said simply, and went back to his drawing. Daniel stood in his kitchen on a quiet Virginia morning, coffee in hand, sunlight through the window, the sound of his son humming to himself. He thought about Emma. He thought about her every day and would for the rest of his life and wouldn't have it any other way. You were right, he told her silently. She was worth knowing. He could almost hear Emma's voice. That laugh, that certainty. I know, she would have said. I always know. Outside, the American flag moved in the morning breeze. The roses were blooming. And Daniel Harper, soldier, father, woodworker, survivor, smiled into his coffee and let the morning be good. Some people come home carrying only wounds. Others come home carrying something they didn't expect. The quiet discovery that life, even after loss, even after everything, has a way of offering its hand again. You only have to be brave enough to take it.